Welcome back. Joining me today is Professor Humphrey Ojuang, a former senior research fellow at the Institute of African Studies, University of Nairobi, Kenya, and currently the honorary professor at the Institute of Traditional Medicine, Muhimbili University of Health and Allied Sciences in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. Welcome, Professor, to the show.
Thank you.
Karibu sana. To start us with, could you tell us what ethnoconservation is all about for the benefit of the viewers who are not well versed with it, particularly in the Kenyan context, and why it is important and how it differs from the traditional conservation method?
Thank you.
Yes.
Ethnoconservation. The prefix ethno
Yes.
means people specific. And so when you add the prefix ethno to the word conservation,
Yes.
then it means you are looking at conservation from the perspective of the people, the local people, or if you like, the indigenous people. Now, ethnoconservation is therefore linked to the larger context of what I may call ethnoscience. Science as based in the activities, the systematic activities of an indigenous people group. That is, in essence, the difference between ethnoconservation and conservation. Now, conservation simply means utilization of knowledge and resources in a way that is sustainable, not just for this generation, the present generation, but also for the future generation. So when you conserve water, when you conserve food, when you conserve other resources which sustain life, then we can talk of conservation. Conservation of natural resources and other resources which sustain life. And in our Kenyan context, ethnoconservation would therefore mean how the indigenous peoples in Kenya, we can talk of peoples or people groups in Kenya, for example, the Luo people, the Gikuyu people, the Kamba people, the Kalenjin people, the Luhya people, the coastal people, including the Mjikenda, the Giriama, the Rabai, the Digo, and the other related groups, the Taita people, the Taveta people, the Somali people in Kenya, and other groups like the Turkana people, and many more. All these indigenous peoples of Kenya had their knowledge systems. They had their ways of managing their resources for the current generation and for future generations. So when we talk of ethnoconservation, we are looking at the way the indigenous peoples conserve their resources, utilize their resources in a sustainable manner.
Great. Wow. Nice to see people like you embracing conservation. So, Professor, could you kindly tell us about your background and why the interest in ethnoconservation? What inspired you, to embrace the traditional knowledge and conservation practices in Kenya?
Yes, let me start from my childhood. I was born in Kisii town, in the Nyanza region of Kenya, and that's the historical Nyanza region of Kenya. Today, of course, Kenya is divided into counties, and so the historic regions or provinces are now in the past, but history remains history. So I was born in the Nyanza region of Kenya, in Kisii town, of Luo parents. My father was a civil servant a teacher and later a civil servant. And my mother was a teacher too. So I was brought up in a small village called Kamagambo, where I lived with the extended family, including my paternal grandmother. And I spent a lot of time with my paternal grandmother in her compound, which was a beautiful, beautiful place, surrounded by euphorbia fence, and there were a lot of trees in the compound, indigenous trees. And my grandmother lived a simple village life where she used the local resources in her compound for her sustenance, including food and medicine. And because I was named after my grandfather, paternal grandfather, my grandmother treated me with a lot of respect, and I didn't understand why, but in me she saw the reincarnation of her husband, and that is Ojuang Wunogando, after whom I was named, my father's father. So that was my childhood. Of course, there was a local primary school, a local church, and a local health center, which took care of illnesses within the community, and the staff there were mission trained. They were trained by European and American missionaries who lived in my village, because Kamagambo was a mission village created by the European and the American Christian missionaries who settled there, I think way back in 1912. So that is my background. So although there was a local primary school, there was a local health center, and there was a local community influenced by European missionaries and American missionaries who visited or stayed in the village to evangelize the local people, there was also the coexisting traditional life, the coexisting traditional knowledge systems, the existing traditional Luo, and because we are on the border, Abagusi communities. So there was that blending of the alien or the foreign and the indigenous or the local. So that is the background in which I was born and raised up. So I went to the local primary school, later I went to high school, Mbita High School, and then Maseno School. At Maseno, I was good in both arts and sciences. At Maseno, I specialized in English, history, and economics, and general studies. Got my 3 principles, joined the university, Kenyatta University College, which was at that time part of the University of Nairobi, graduating with the Bachelor of Education, English option. Teaching high school briefly, then teaching English in a teacher's college, also briefly, and then teaching in 2 national polytechnics, handling English essentially. That is Mombasa Polytechnic and Kenya Polytechnic. Today they are full-fledged universities. Got a scholarship under the British Council Technical Assistance Program to the government of Kenya, and took a master's degree, Master of Science degree in English, teaching of English for specific purposes. I was mainly interested in English for science and technology. And I was being trained to come back and equip our technicians who were being trained in national polytechnics. The 2 national polytechnics at that time were Mombasa Polytechnic and Kenya Polytechnic. So I taught in both. At that time, I didn't know that I would be interested in a broader sense of culture than merely language. So as I was teaching in these 2 national polytechnics, I had to interact with people in the biological sciences. I taught them technical report writing, people in the cartography and engineering and surveying. So my linguistic training or my linguistic background enabled me to interact with these people who are training in applied sciences and technology. So I developed an interest in the language of science and technology. And I later on developed an interest in language, culture and society, and the way these three elements interact. Now, knowledge is knowledge. And when people tell you, oh, you are a scientist, oh, you are an artist, that is compartmentalizing knowledge, and that's not useful. Knowledge is integrated. We're dealing with knowing systems. Now, when I bring my linguistic background and my educational background, and someone else brings their science and technology background, then we get this holistic approach. And what equipped me most was discourse studies. So discourse in the sense that I got interested in how scientists communicated their technical or their scientific knowledge. And so I moved into linguistic anthropology. And what is linguistic anthropology? Linguistic anthropology is the study of how language, culture, and society interact. And within this, I got interested in lexicology and lexicography. Lexicology is the study of vocabulary of a language. Lexicology is the study of the vocabulary of a language. And lexicography is the art and science of dictionary compilation. So I got interested in studying how, for example, the Luo people of East Africa named their plants and animals. But I was more into the naming of plants. And the naming of plants would then fall within ethnobotany. And earlier on, we talked about ethnoconservation.
Yes.
So ethnobotany and ethnoconservation, these fall within what I call linguistic anthropology. So at the University of Nairobi, I taught linguistics to education students. I later had the privilege of teaching linguistics to anthropology students, and I spent many years there. So total number of years at the University of Nairobi, 34 years. So I taught education students and I taught anthropology students, but my focus was language, it was linguistic. And linguistic anthropology here led me to study the environment, of course using the linguistic trajectory, and how language, not just English, but indigenous languages can be used to preserve knowledge, to retrieve that knowledge, to study the systematic way of classifying that knowledge, and also to record that knowledge. And in my case, creating word lists and also analyzing those technical words used in the codification of that knowledge. Wow. Hence, my interest in ethnoconservation, ethnobotany, and linguistic anthropology follow naturally from my training as a language teacher. English language teacher, but I have not since diversified, and I'm interested in indigenous languages, like Ngui wa Thiong'o says, that if we lose our indigenous languages, then we lose our indigenous knowledge systems. So currently, that is my focus. And that's how I came into this committee, of which I am the founder chair, the Ethnoconservation Committee of Nature Kenya, which is part of the East African Natural History Society.
Great. Thank you. It's really amazing to see how the African traditional knowledge is indeed very precious in conservation. Now, Professor, here in Kenya, are there some particular communities whom their traditional practices have had a positive impact on conservation? And if so, which are these communities?
I would say most of the communities in Kenya, most of the indigenous people groups in Kenya have had their own ways of preserving the indigenous knowledge systems for the benefit of the present generation and other generations to come in future. We have the Maasai people, for example. They are well known in Kenya, and not just in Kenya, but in northern Tanzania, in their knowledge of herbal medicine. Their knowledge of herbal medicine. So although the missionaries came and brought hospitals, mission hospitals, although governments have built public hospitals with modern equipment, doctors, nurses, and all the support staff dealing with different diseases, the Maasai people have also maintained their knowledge of harvesting the plant-based medicines, processing them in their own ways, and applying them or using them for their sustenance. The same would be said of the Agikuyu of central Kenya, or the Kikuyu of central Kenya, the Meru also of the central highlands of Kenya, the Embu of the central highlands of Kenya, the Mbere of the central highlands of Kenya, the Geshogu and the Ndia in Kirinyaga County, also central highlands of Kenya. They have utilized their knowledge systems, and they still rely on those knowledge systems side by side with what we call the scientific knowledge systems brought about by colonial administration and by mission hospitals, because the missionaries played a critical role alongside the colonial administration. The Luo people, for example, along the shores of Lake Victoria, both in Kenya and Tanzania, they have maintained some traditional medical systems. They practice them, they use them, and of course they also use the Western medical systems which were brought about by the missionaries and by the colonial administration. I can also think of the Abagusi, who developed also in the Nyanza region, who developed very sophisticated surgical systems. They could actually conduct brain, or if you like, head surgery when there was injury. And that knowledge is now fading. We have not captured it, and we have not restored it or modified it or improved it today, because the missionaries tended to tell the people to abandon certain healing practices. And some missionaries actually criminalized and also demonized some of these health systems. And people were discouraged from using them. But today, there is a new approach. And World Health Organization acknowledges the fact that some of these things were effective, very effective. So they can coexist side by side. The traditional medical systems and the modern medical systems, they can coexist and complement one another. So yes, there are indigenous African people groups. The Maasai are the best example I can give you, both in Kenya and Tanzania. the Luo in Kenya and Tanzania. Of course, there are Luo-related groups in Uganda and South Sudan and in the Congo and so on, but we are focusing on Kenya today. So they have their indigenous knowledge systems. The Luo people have a special word for traditional knowledge. They call it, or traditional medicine, they call it Yadnya Luo, which means Luo medicine. They don't just say tradition, they go to the extent to say, this is Luo medicine. This is Luo food, which means it is native and indigenous to them.